Ciao a tutti, it's Aurum and today we are ripping off Kigan again. um, yeah, no, it's doing top 20 trap cards in the hot format because, well, seems like a cool idea, and that's about as many traps as I have for you. I have 24, there's 4 honorable mentions. Let's get just into it. I am considering every trap that is legal in the format, so archetypal, non-archetypal, all counts. So yeah, number 24 we have Imperial Iron Wall. Try to go over the honorable mentions quickly. It's great versus spellbooks because it shuts down Fate and Priestess. It's amazing game winning really versus Dragon Rulers. And yeah, the main issue with it is that there's a lot of random cards in decks that banish, and it turns off those Tidal in Mermal, Sombre in Constellars, and the dude from Evil Storms, which I have having a brain freeze about, and also Breakthrough, but it also counters Breakthrough and Didicro, which some decks really hate. So yeah, Imperial Iron Wall, number 24. Number 23 we have and it is Emptiness, which might surprise a few of you, but if you've played, and I'm talking to you MBT, yeah, but if you've played that format in the last 2 years, you will not be surprised at how much of a non-issue it is in the format, because only combo decks can really run it, and combo decks kinda suck. There's some Protected Castle decks that can also run it, but those also kinda suck. So yeah, the thing is, it's stuck in bad decks, and it's not that strong versus the top decks. It's not game winning most of the time. It can cheese out wins, but it's not amazing versus those decks. It's only really great in combo mirrors, and those are quite rare. Game winningly powerful, strong. Yeah. Number 22 is Light Imprisoning Mirror. Don't know if you're seeing a pattern here, but yeah, Light Imprisoning Mirror is a great floodgate versus artifact decks, but you have to be running a non-light deck, which cuts a lot of decks out of contention, and even when you do, it's not foolproof. It's bound to be blown up sometime by an Ignition, Double Cyclone, MST, Myrmidon special summon. There's a lot of ways to out Light Imprisoning Mirror for the decks that it does it. It also does out Boojins, which they don't have so many outs to the card. So yeah. Number 22. Number 21 we have another Floodgate. This is kind of basically better vanities outside of artifact decks. It's not meant to win on the spot. It's mostly meant to stall out the opponent until you can get an OTK, which most decks that run Rivalry can do. Rulers, Sylvans especially, Gyurgia Karakuri, that's another one. The only exception to this rule is spellbooks, because spellbooks. So it's kind of self-explanatory why they can run it and why they cannot OTK with it under play, but can still control the game with it to a certain extent. And it's great versus stuff like Gyurgias, Mermals. Gyurgias can't access their extra deck pool, which is kind of how they win besides the traps. Mermals, they cannot really destroy it very quickly. They have to slow down to a crawl to be able to get rid of it. And so yeah, let's get into the list proper. Starting off with another Floodgate, DNA Surgery. DNA is such a strong card versus spellbooks because it stops Fate, it stops Master. Early game it even stops Tower, but that's just early game. And they can chain Wisdom to it, but they can only do that on the turn, on the activation. After that turn, DNA is staying up, so like they have to. If you draw it early, they usually don't have 3 targets for Fate to banish the surgery with Fate, so can be quite deadly early game. Later on can be a little bit trickier, but just bait out the Fate and you'll be fine. Just you have to be skillful on when you activate it. You have to make sure they cannot just chain Fate to it. But other than that, really strong versus spellbooks. Besides that, really strong versus Bujins. And a great thing about it is that pretty much any deck can play it, because any deck can just call its own type. Even if it's strong versus them, they can just name their own type. So an example is like Girgias. If you name Dinosaur, they cannot make machines, but if you call machines, they can just play fine under it. And speaking of dinosaurs, Evolzars, you can make Evolzars with it. I don't think that has ever topped, besides what's its name? I don't remember who, but they topped with a fucking bonkers list of whatever. So that's the best way to describe the deck. So yeah, that's an outlier. But yeah, whatever. Moving on to number 19. We have the last continuous spell in continuous trap in a row that we're going to be talking about. Call of the Haunted. It's great in artifact decks because it has so much synergy, but the issue is like it's not an artifact card, it's a generic card, and that kinda cuts a few points from it because it's only played in artifacts. Like the only deck that plays it besides that is Control Sylvans. Everything else just doesn't. So, but it's great in artifact decks because you can bounce it off play this, and that's a huge power play. It can make you dodge the Crow, but at the same time it can be dead early game. It's a great target to MST in a deck that can be quite hard to blind MST into. So strong card, but just in artifacts. So I'm kinda cutting some points from it. Next up, we have another surprisingly low card for players of the time, Blackhorn of Heaven. It's mostly just a side deck card for heavy XYZ decks that don't play a lot of back row hate and that kinda have to win via XYZs. So Girgias, Madolches, those kinds of decks. Because decks like Mermels and Artifact Traptrix, they don't really live or die by their XYZs. Spellbooks, obviously. But it is a very nice side card that pretty much any control deck can side. And for Protected Castle decks, like Evil Swarms, sometimes Bujins, it is a solid card to main deck because it stops extra deck staples such as 101 and Exiton that usually out your board. You can just make Blackhorn to stop them. And in the same vein as Blackhorn, we have Traptrix Triple Nightmare. Another card that stops the extra deck staples. But the main reason I put it so low is because you only really run it either in Protected Castle decks or in decks with Traptrixes. Otherwise, you don't really ever want to run this card because it can be great versus stuff like Girgian Tex, Mix It Miss Timing, a lot of XYZ monsters. It's great versus artifacts. But at the same time, if you search it with Murmillo, you know that it's there, and it's a lot weaker when you know that it's there because a lot of the times you can just not use the effect. It's not like Bottomless that you have to play through it. With Trap-Trick Supple Nightmare, you can just not play into it sometimes, and you're good versus it. Besides that, the only deck that sometimes plays it is Spellbooks, because you know it's a good artifact counter, and Spellbooks are kind of starved for that. So it is an option in there, but it's not a common option even really. So yeah. Trap-Trick Supple Nightmare number 16, number 15, no, 20, 19, 17, 16, yeah. Number 15, Burger King Food Lettuce. The last thing you'd want in your Burger King burger is food fungi, but apparently that's what you get. Anyways, Phoenix Penguin Blast. Card is great in decks that can afford the discard, pretty much. Thing is, not many decks can afford the discard. The main deck that runs it is Mythic Rulers, because they kinda have free discards anyways. You know, Mythic is not in the best spot. And another deck that can run it is Mermail, because they have a controller, which is mostly just dead, sitting there in the hand, so Phoenix is fine. But you know, it's a -1, and you know, the spin back is useful. Objectively, like versus Artifact Trap-Tricks, you can just blindly MST and you're going to be mostly fine. Versus Kyrgyz, you just spin back the armor, and that's very good. But yeah, it can be just used as a good compulse. Just compulse, but you know, goes -1. But some decks can just afford that. So like, you know, it's a good card. Can hit anything that's really strong for it. But yeah, it's kind of limited in what decks can run it. Very limited, really. But yeah. Next up, we have another Floodgate. We're back to the Floodgate. We have a Soul Drain. Really strong Floodgate in the side deck. We are gonna talk about it more when we get to Macrocosmos, but you know, kind of the main upside compared to Macrocosmos is that a couple more decks can run it. Spellbooks can run it, Firefist can run it. Macro can't really be run in those decks. So yeah, I will just talk about it more when we get to Macrocosmos, the downsides of it compared to Macro. Number 13, we have Trapstun. A really solid card for OTK decks, and that's kinda it, really. Not OTK combo decks, just OTK decks. So Gyurgia Karakuri and Madolche are the two main decks that run it very often, and you know, those decks are not amazing. So. But you know, in those decks, the card is really strong. It's kind of the main card you want to see to start going off, really. So yeah, I feel like it is in a good spot in the meta. So yeah. Number 13, we have. Let's see, what did we have? Finish Chain. That might be a bit surprising, but. You know, it's only really run in a very select few decks. Gyurgias, which, you know, that's a big thing, but it's kind of mainly Gyurgias and Spellbooks. And the reason why is because they want the attack protection, but, you know, at the same time, stopping a main deck monster means that it's mostly just gonna be used for an XYZ material. You can't really use it on rank 5s and 6s, so that stops Pleiades, which is a really big target for Breakthrough Skill, which is its main competition. Because they can just overlay M7 on top of it, or Gaia Dragon on top of everyone else. You know, besides that, it's not run in a lot of decks. Can be an option in like Fire Fists, I guess. But for the most part, breaker skills just run over it in everything. Like, you just run 3 finish and 1 or 2 or 3 breakthrough skills. Spellbook is the only deck that just runs finish chain and not breakthrough, and that's because they really need the attack stop because they are small boys. So yeah. Next up we have the other part of the trio, really. The Fisher is not on this list, but we have Macrocosmos alongside the Soul Drain for the Anti-Graveyard Brigade. The reason Macro is higher up, even though it can be running less decks, is because Macro shuts down Soul Charge and Soul Drain does not. So by virtue of that, Macro is higher. Also, Soul Drains has the life points cost, which can be a bit annoying, you know. Yeah. And last, before the top 10, we have at number 11, Wiretap. This is really strong in Gilgas and a good side deck card, but main deck, most other decks don't main deck it. You know, you see it in Madolches and sometimes Bujins, and that's really it. You know, it's only good in slow decks. And not slow decks that run artifacts, because those you just want more MSTs in those decks. So you want it in slow decks that don't really mind drawing it later on. You just set it, and then after a while you start comboing off with your Gilgas or your Madolches, and you want Wiretap as backup for them. Besides that, you know, it's a solid side deck card, but you know, not staple, really. So yeah, number 11, just outside of the top 10. Speaking of side deck staple, we have the Bank, which if Maxi is the absolute 100% staple of the side deck outside Infernity, and Idicro is the second 100% absolute staple in the side deck outside Infernities, then the Bank is, in my opinion, the third best side deck card in the format, in my humble opinion. It's not something that gets sided every single time, but it's something that I personally side pretty much in anything. It's alive versus pretty much everything. You know, some decks you really just want to stop the engine, so stuff like Mythic Rulers, artifacts, Mermels. You know, those are pretty obvious. If you hate hands or hand traps, it's also a good siding versus Gilgas, because they play hands and hand traps. But yeah, it does stop hand traps, which is very good. It's a very strong versus Bujins, because it's not just, it doesn't only stop the Gilgas trap, but more importantly, it stops Crane and Honest. And versus spellbooks, you stop the Priestess, which versus some decks is just really all you need, because besides that, like, artifact decks don't really care about anything else that spellbook does besides Priestess. So if you can stop that, you're golden. So yeah, the Bank, just really strong card. Pretty much any deck can side it. So I feel like it's a very strong card in the format. Number 9, we have the best Floodgate in the format, Skill Drain. Fuck this card! Seriously, fuck this card! In Mythic Rulers. Like, I like this card in previous formats where you play with Neosadios and TGs and those small monsters, but then you give this fucking card to Mythic Rulers, which just spam out at 2000 and more bitter, and it's fucking annoying. Rant over. Anyways, Skill Drain, just really strong card in the format. You can protect it with Stardust, make very strong boards with it, because, you know, Stardust goes under it. You get a very strong bitter in Colossal Fighter under it, and yeah, you just summon a bunch of big monsters, and it's so annoying. The thing is also that, like, bit of a Mythic Rulers, they do play other traps, so you cannot just blind MST. You kind of have to save your MSTs for it, which is annoying when you're playing double Cyclone in artifact decks. You want to blind MST in the end phase, and you can't really do that versus Mythic Rulers because skill drain. If it sticks, you're dead. So yeah, very strong floodgate in the format, but it's brought down by the fact that it is only played by Mythic Rulers and Hieratic Rulers. So that's not too common. Speaking of common, we have the least powerful of the limited control traps, I guess you can call them. Compulse. It's definitely the weakest, and you can tell by the fact that it's not a staple in those decks. Like you can quite often see artifact decks and Girgia decks just cut it. But because like if you need to cut the trap, that's often the trap you want to cut. But at the same time, it is a very versatile card, very strong versus extra deck monsters. Obviously it's dead versus Spellbook, but who isn't? And even versus Spellbooks, it's fine versus Justice. If they don't have Wisdom, like turn, if you go first, it's fine. Anyways, but yeah, Compose good versus extra deck monsters. That's kind of the main thing you use it for. But like Blackhorn, you can use it going second. It is versatile, in which you can use it for other things. You can even sometimes use it for protection. So yeah, Compose, strong number 8 in the rankings. At number 7 we have sorry, we had a little cut. It's one of the main reasons Mermals are so good in the format, and also one of, the reason why you can just blind MST versus Mermals. Because like if this gets popped by your MST, you go so neg. It's insane. So you have to save it, and this way it protects the other backers. And it can be used to gain a lot of advantage by summoning Lind, summoning Pike, searching. You can get a big beater of lead. You can just use it as an extender during your turn. Just a very versatile card. Very strong. Very strong. What can I say? It's Abyssphere. If you played versus Mermals, you know Abyssphere. So it's my favorite part about playing versus Mermals. Just playing around the Abyssphere is very fun, in my opinion. Also, stops OTKs. That's very strong in the deck. Versus combo decks. So it's good. Yeah. Number 6, just outside of the top 10, we have Bottomless. Main reason it's so low, relatively speaking, it's number 6, but the main reason it's not higher is that, versus Spellbooks, it's completely dead. Versus Artifact Traprix, it's not very good. It's like, it's fine. It's fine. It removes a moral attack from the field, but it still gets the effect. It removes an XYZ, but if it's Pleiades or Exiton, it still gets the effect. And if it's 101, it doesn't die. And if it's Tiras, it doesn't die. And those are kind of the main cards that they make, really. So Bottomless is not that strong versus Artifact Traprix decks, at least not versus Cat. But one of the big upsides about Bottomless is it stops Soul Charge. Sometimes. Depends. They have to not play around it. And some decks can play around it, some cannot. Like Constellars just cannot. Everything is above 1500 besides big attack. But yeah, there's also like versus Girgias and Mermals, there's some good targets and some less good targets. Versus Girgias, there's a normal summon Firehand, I guess, or a special summon Firehand outside the damage step. How often does that happen? Not very, but but besides that, there's Arsenal, which is a good target, and Girgian Tex, which is a good target if they didn't use Girgia Gear, because in that situation they just summon the Girgiano and then they just make another Gigantex usually from that. So yeah, bottomless, even versus Mermals, you know, it's strong versus their soul charges, but besides that, the only real strong targets is Lind and Tidal, and you know, soul charge. But yeah, besides that, it's actually amazing versus the Mythic, the Dragon Rulers. So there's that. But you know, bottomless can sit there for quite a while, and also the fact that it's often just search of Murmillo makes it feel a bit less powerful, because you can just, you know, it's there, so you kind of just play around it or play into it to play through it. So yeah, that's my number 6. Number 5, speaking of, Gear. Fuck this card, man. This card is insane. If it resolves, Girgia's usually just win. It's a +2 that snowballs into protection for your boss monster. Floating, but you know, lets you get over stuff. You know, the only real weakness of Gear is that it's pretty weak to Max C, because like if you use it, you are kind of forced into Gigantex, and if you have a back row to back that Max C up, it's quite strong. Because it's quite a problem, because you are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You can't really extend as you would like to. But yeah, Gear just insane card. You cannot. You risk blind. If you blind MST into Girgias, you not only risk not hitting the finish chains, but you get Gear, and not all decks can just run over both of the monsters and armor. Most decks cannot do that, especially early game. So, you know, fuck this card. I'm joking. It's fine. Kinda okay. I have a conflicting opinions on it. But the last archetypal trap that we are going to be seeing today is Artifact Sanctum, which, if we're talking about just power level, it's probably number 1. The thing is, like, you have to be playing an artifact deck, and if you're not playing an artifact deck and you're playing Sanctum with more attacks, I don't think that's a very good idea, in my opinion. Just don't like it. I don't like Cory McDuffie ratios, but yeah, Sanctum in artifact decks is just, it's just the best card in the deck. You know, a lot of the counters, Crow, and the Bank, and Soul Drain. You activate Sanctum, you don't give a shit. You just summon more attack. Who cares? If you feel confident, you have the Bank or a Cold Hunted, or it's game 1, you just summon a big attack, pop a moral attack, and make a play these, and you're good. And you know, if they blind MST into Sanctum and they have board presence, that's really strong too. So yeah, Sanctum is just a fucking powerhouse, because like the artifacts are just a fucking powerhouse in the format. You know, that's kind of it. But you know what counters the artifacts? Great segue. Breaker Skill. Number 3. Card is so good versus artifacts, and it's good to a certain extent versus almost everything. You know, it's fine versus Girgias. They don't have really many targets for it later on. Just 101 and what's its name? Zenmei's Protection. But besides that, you know, it's fine as just removal in a deck that, you know, the finish wouldn't have been that strong anyways. And then versus Spellbooks, it is a decent early game before they get Wisdom out, but after that it's just dead. But you know, versus artifacts, it's obviously amazing, because like you hit their turn 1 normal summon, and then you hit their artifacts, and just it's great. Versus Mermals, you only really can hit an end phase spike. That's decent. But another thing that is very good to counter with Breakthrough Skill is Abyss Dweller. And because of that, it's a 100% staple in Mermail. You just cannot play Mermails without Breakthrough Skill, because otherwise you just auto-lose to Dweller too often. Breakthrough Skill just gives you that protection from it. And a lot of rogue decks are kind of fucked by Breakthrough Skill's existence. Decks like Bujins or not Bujins, Boxers or Revolzers really hate Breakthrough Skill. And yeah, it's very impactful card in the format. It's also useful going second, and it's very strong at breaking combo boards. It's good versus combo boss monsters like Pleiades or Felgrand or Dracosac. It's such a strong card in the format. It's Breakthrough Skill. You know, it's the most common trap in the format. Just always have to play around it. Yeah, I'll play through it often. So yeah. Number 2. This is another case of like if you are talking just power, Solemn would probably be either number 1 or number 2 after Sanctum. But you know, we're going also in terms of representation, and you know, Solemn is not as common as the number 1 spot. A big reason for it is the 2000 life point cost, unironically, because Soul Charge decks just cannot really run Warning. The only deck that does run sometimes 3 Soul Charge and Warning is Mermail, and that's nowhere near a staple at all. That's just an option. And you know, there's also Infernities, but I feel like that's just a bad option. But you know, Warning, it stops Soul Charge. That's already a huge upside to it. It's not something that other cards can do. It's one of the few traps in the format that is good versus spellbooks. Pretty much the only non-engine trap that is good versus spellbooks besides Floodgates. Because like they cannot chain Wisdom to it. Besides that, it stops stuff like you know, Sanctum, even if you know it gets a pop off it, but do what you gotta do. Stops XYZ summons really good. They can't trigger Girigan text, which is good. Stops Abyss Sphere, stops Theos. It's just a fantastic card. But because of that 2000 point cost, it doesn't see play in as many decks as the number 1, which is Torrential Tribute. Kinda like in Edison. This card is not as insane power level wise, because there's a lot of decks that you don't, you know, it's just mostly usually just a 2 for 1. 1 for 2, sorry. So, you know, +1. So it's good, but it's not that it's amazing versus those decks. Always can be very strong, but usually it's not. But the main thing is that pretty much every deck plays it. Almost. You know, Sylvans, Infernities, Lightstone Rulers, they don't play it, but Mythic Rulers, yes. Mermails, yes. You know, those kinds of decks that are pretty selective about the traps, you know, that those decks always run Torrential. The only deck that runs traps and doesn't run Torrentials, really, besides that runs non-Floodgate, non-Breakthrough Skill traps, is Constellars, because you want to have more field advantage. So, and you already have plenty of removal. But you know, Torrential, just it's Torrential, man. You always have to play around it. You have to play with it in mind until it's gone, and because it's in almost every deck in the format. So yeah, that's it from me. Leave a like, join the Discord, leave a comment, subscribe, all the good shit. Hope I didn't bore you. And goodbye.